Welcome to the Creative Cow Show. Creative Cow is very excited today to introduce Phil Cramer, the animation director for Digital Domain and the magician behind the movie Morbius. Hello, Phil. It is really great to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Now, Digital Domain has been around for 30 years. Can you tell us a little bit about your history with Digital Domain?
Yeah, for sure. I've been at DD now for quite some time. I've been here 12 years. I started at a time I worked on a movie Avatar. It's called, and I was for 3 years in New Zealand working on that. And after we wrapped, sort of looked to come back to America and ended up going to Digital Domain because they were doing a lot of facial work similar to what Avatar was trying to do, is just push the best faces possible. And they had just done Benjamin Buttons. So I was very excited to see how they did that and sort of keep working there on that same goal to do really hyper real faces and really successful CG characters.
And speaking of faces, over the years, CGI faces have been notoriously difficult to accomplish, and yet Digital Domain in this movie in Morbius, you went 100% VFX. So no prosthetics, no makeup. That's a pretty amazing goal to me. Was that a internal goal for the company, for you? Was it a natural progression of the technology?
I think it's sort of a bit of everything. I mean, for us, obviously, is one big goal is to push it as far as possible and stay in the realm of believability, especially when it's a one-to-one human. And so for us, that Morbius ended up being that, but we, as you say, I think over the years, we had a lot of stepping stones to get there. We started with Benjamin Button, I mentioned that earlier. Then we worked on Tron, and from there we went more into the fantasy realm with Maleficent, and always focused on different faces. And I think it got really to the height of it with Thanos a few years back, where we ended up really being able to recreate a fictional character, but looking like Josh Brolin-ish, like when he's emoting and such. And so for us, that was something to build on, because what was different in Morbius to lots of these other shows, that you have many faces of Jared Leto. Like you have him just being Jared Leto and has like these very fast vampire blooms, we call them, where he quickly turns into a vampire. And that was quite challenging because like if you just blend from the face, it ends up looking like a CG gag. And so we early on realized the more CG we before we turn into the vampire, the better. And I think in most of the really successful shots, we went pretty much from full CG Jared to full CG Morbius, and like that, it was much more seamlessly. And I think you didn't notice really where the change occurred and how it was happening. Yeah, that was a conscious decision, but we were a tad nervous, obviously, about it because there were so many super close-up performances from Jared, and he's quite recognizable, obviously. So we had to nail the performances, and he's not, I think, an actor where we can start having a different performance because we couldn't hit his. It has to be his performance. And so this was kind of the very difficult aspect about it, that he has huge range of motion in his face. And we needed to stay accurate, that it's like that he's not a different character all of a sudden appear when he's CG. And I think we succeeded there quite a bit.
So what would you say are some of the most important developments that have come along in the past few years that have allowed Digital Domain to go 100% VFX?
Traditionally, right, we would just do motion capture of the face. I mean, when I say traditionally, from Final Fantasy all the way back in the day to now, it's normally you have a marked up face, you have some sort of a helmet camera capturing the performance, and then you just use that to drive an animation rig. And you try to get as close as possible. Normally we use fax rig, which the facial action coding based rigs. Anyway, so we did do this to a certain aspect here, right? But for us, the big difference was we used something called Masquerade, which uses still all the markers on the face in a very similar fashion, but what we do with them is very different. We no longer drive a fax-based rig. We generate a super high-res mesh of the actor. But this is something that we can just do based on these quite low-res markers. So when you look at the markers themselves, you have some 80-odd markers in the face, and if you would connect all of them, you get quite the faceted face, right? And that's really the resolution that you play with. And you get the detail by having modeling get all these beautiful shapes that get activated, by the animation of those markers. We not, that's not how we do it now. We're taking the entire mesh and we drive another mesh of that different character. And so this is really where Masquerade comes in. You plug in all these individual markers and it outputs a super dense high-res mesh that then in turn drives our character. This sounds like you don't have any control over it, but we then have underlying a traditional fax rig that the animators can offset performances or override them. But for us, this was critical. And so this was a step-by-step development. It didn't just happen in one go, but the biggest step was with Avengers, where we, on Thanos, were able to really make machine learning make a big aspect of our animation pipeline. And this was something, I mean, it sounds for me crazy just a few years before that you would be able to like sort of guesstimate via machine learning by just iterations after iterations to get to something that matches exactly to the actor. It would incredibly speed up our pace, how we can turn shots like that around. Like the animators would basically start at 80 or 70 to 80% basis and then have more time to get to 100%. Well, before, like, it's just to get to 80% is already sort of a nightmare, and then you don't normally have the time to do this extra plussing. To add also, like, because I think the helmet mounted cameras we're using, right, they're not from DD. We're using Technoprops cameras currently, or normally depending on the project, but on this one we use Technoprops. And the resolution of them got so much better over the last 10 years. I'm just saying, like, there is a huge change. And it's the same with filtering on those, on the little lenses of these. It is so challenging with the different lighting conditions when you have an actor walking around a stage to actually capture every frame accurately with these cameras, right? Because you get light wash and all of a sudden you don't see for a few frames markers at all. All this has changed a lot. So all the quality that we capture via these cameras is so much better. And then Masquerade is able to use all that additional data and upres it even more.
Now, you said that they were mounted on the head.
Yes. So basically, this is a traditional workflow when you do body performance capture, body and face at the same time. You would have a full body mocap suit with the little bolts and then a helmet. Then the helmet has normally one boom with two cameras attached, or you have, back in the day, we had two booms with two cameras each side. And so they move with the actor's head, no matter what he does. So you always get a very close-up image thereof of all the markers moving. And we use that to track the face and to tracking all these individual markers to start with. And it's great reference for the animators too, to sort of side by side and see exactly what Jared did and then mimic that.
So you can use these cameras to track the face and then kind of build his profile and build the vampire face from that.
Yes. But our first step is always like, we want to recreate the actor, whoever in this case, Jared Leto, we want to be as accurate to him as humanly possible. And so, and for that, it is absolutely important to not like go from the image to the vampire, but what we do is we go from the image to a CG version of Jared that nobody will really see. It's internal on our end. It's just to verify that the performance is matching. And then from there, you retarget onto this character. Because if you skip the middle step, it's, I think, very easy to just come up with some creative performance that isn't grounded into the actual actor. And because especially what's so important is like with Morbius, when he looks like full on Morbius, is you want that at all times. If somebody sees an image of that, there is a correlation back to Jared Leto, that it's not just like a beautifully made model, but it's that with Jared Leto and the expression that all the wrinkles follow exactly his wrinkle lines. When he smiles, it's the same style of smile with all the details matching Jared's smile. And so then I think for people that know Jared, you see him smile and you see the vampire smile and you think like, I know this person, right? And We don't need to always hammer it over the head because some of these designs are quite not alike. But like the more then you play with these, what makes a person that person, you ingrain them back into the CG character, then I think you get this connection really good. Fun thing we ended up doing is with Jared, because what happened is we shot all the film in London, and so a lot of the story was still developing, and we knew the vampire would still be like the design wasn't fully finished, and we were still fleshing things out. So there was opportunity to do facial capture also later, not just on set. And so what we ended up doing, we created on our mocap stage, a very atypical setup, I find. And it was designed to make the actor as comfortable as possible. We put like couches there and darkened all the room more down than we would normally do, because it was only for facial capture of Jared. And so he was fully marked up, but he didn't wear a bodysuit, but had full freedom of movement. He could sit, lie, whatever he wants to do. We had mini screens up with performances so that in case he wants to see something on loop or so, the whole idea was to just make him feel as comfortable as possible, make him forget about technology, and just focus that he just acts. And he did fantastic in these sessions. And we did them, I think, 3 times over the last 2 years, where we always came back to LA. We always used the same setup where we tried again to get it really calm and nice. And we called it like inside the actor studio. That was always my thought. It's like, let's make it like that it doesn't feel like this crazy technology, all these cameras, that you don't think about that, and just focus on turning into vampires, because you had to do all these crazy noises and facial expressions. And that takes a lot out of an actor, I feel, when you do over and over these Gollum-like sounds, right? This is very taxing. So we wanted to make sure it's fun while doing it, So we had snacks everywhere and tried to make it a different kind of a mocap capture.
What would you say was the most challenging or possibly rewarding scene in the movie Morbius that you and your team were able to create?
I mean, because we were the main vendor, we had so many fun areas. But I think the biggest shot, and this is probably one of the biggest shots I've ever worked on, is it's when he goes through the tunnels into the subway station. And there's a bit where he's chasing Milo through a door. It's one long shot. I think the shot is like over 1.5 minutes long. It has multiple giant CG slow-mo sections and such. And it's just, from the physical standpoint, those stunts were incredibly challenging. And it started for me in London 2.5 years before the pandemic. And like just shooting mocap over and over of people doing these tunnel crawls, and then later stitching that all back together into this epic long shot. It's really one of the highlights, I think. And the animation is really outstanding, and the effects, it's sort of everything coming together. So I'm really proud of that.
Yes, when he's riding the airflow in the subway, pretty amazing.
And especially to that, what's so nice is some of these ideas were the animators. And this was so beautiful about Morbius, that we were sort of allowed to put our ideas forward. And so that shot you were referring to started with, I think, a simple idea from one of the animators. And then it ended up being this mega shot that just kept going and going. And they kept extending it because it was so exciting. And so this is really fun when you get to put your heart into it. And then, the creative direction, you get some say here and there. And so that was really fun.
Well, thank you, Phil. Thank you so much for joining us here at Creative Cow. It was wonderful to meet you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah.